right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Welcome to Congress. Awesome stuff. And Barbara, thank you so much. And really, maybe some of you guys probably know, but between the staff and an incredible group of volunteers they have here, what they do for Congress is just awesome. So, just a shout out to Barbara, the volunteers, and the staff. Great stuff. Thank you. As you can tell from Barbara, it takes me a long time to figure things out, 10 years to write a book, but and so I decided today with the theme of Congress is to go from the Cayce readings from Rata to Revelation. So we got an hour. Everybody's probably looking going, you gotta be kidding. But it is, and it's an amazing trip, and it's about really, you'll see what I'll talk about here is really what this incredible theme that runs throughout the Cayce readings. And it's, by many cultures, the concept of bringing heaven and earth together, or as, Edgar Cayce put it throughout the readings, becoming a co-creator. And we're going to explore that thread of becoming that co-creator. I mean, the theme of this Congress is bringing the readings to life. And really, what I find of the theme in the Cayce readings is, in our life, bringing that co-creation to life in ourselves. Just hang on. I know Congress is the perfect name for this because Congress means to walk together. That's where it comes from. And we're here for this journey to walk together. Of course, with the hour I have, it's going to be a little bit more of a jog, but we're going to get there. Now, what is co-creation? We hear that term, to become co-creators with God. It's about, from the readings itself, is being in touch with that universal consciousness. That each soul, each entity is a co-creator with that universal consciousness we call God. That's what it is about. And it refers to that act, to partner with the divine. It's a birthright. This is why we're here, is to become that partner, that friend, that companion with God. And we'll see that, how this comes about, and how in the Cayce readings, how the two bookends, I've talked about in Revelations and Rata come together. And some people are actually, uncomfortable with this, but from the readings themselves, that co-creation is becoming a living soul equal with the Creator. See an idea, but some people are uncomfortable with that. But that's our purpose, that's our journey. Man alone is given the soul with the power to become a co-creator with God. Was given the power of heaven and earth together, and the ability to manifest God's force, God's power to become godlike in the world. I look at it, if you think about, if you have children, my kids, I love them dearly. When they were 4 and 5 years old, I loved them dearly, but they couldn't be my friends, they couldn't be my companions. But now they're grown up, now they're peers, now they're my friends. They're my companions, and I still love them as dearly. That's what co-creation is about, and that's what God is. You might say God's got 7 billion children waiting, and he's waiting for them to grow up. But this is really our journey, to be that co-creator with God. And just some background, even when you see what it means, that companionship with God, that complete companionship with God, complete companionship. And companion means friend. When Cayce in the readings talk about that, companion means friend, one who is frequently in the company of the other. And what I thought was really interesting, when you look up, I'm a word guy, I was like, where does that word come from and why? Because sometimes so often we miss the deeper meaning and the roots of it. Companion means breadmate, breadfellow, one who you break bread with. And what's one of the most earliest things we see in the Bible that we carry the tradition on today is communion, that breaking of bread with God. And it all just fits in. In communion, you look at the etymology of the word communion, it means mutual participation, co-creation. To be that mutual participant, to actively co-create with Him. It's just incredible. And again, to be that companion. And even in the Bible, you'll see in the New Testament that quote that's telling us the same thing. out of John, I no longer call you servants. Servants do not know what the master is about. I've told you everything the Father's told me. You can do things even greater than I have. You're no longer servants, you are friends. And that's what it's about, becoming that companion, that friend. I mean, we're told in so many ways to bring that heaven and earth together within ourselves. And that's what it's about. And in the Cayce readings, you see it, time and time again. The relationship to the entity and the universal consciousness of God becoming more and more a conscious reality here, now. And who in the flesh was a manifestation or became the manifestation of the God consciousness in the material world, bringing that heaven and earth together now, that we can do that. Come to that awareness of the relationship to that universal consciousness. That's our journey, that's our purpose. And you see it again, when you look at the Cayce readings time and time again, that it's about. And as I talked about this from Rata to Revelations, probably most of you know about Rata, an incarnation of Edgar Cayce, of the high priest in ancient Egypt of 10,500 BC, where this speaks to exactly that, because we'll see what Rata was doing at 10,500. Building, in the Great Pyramid, creating a cosmic engine, building a physical monument, what's called a cosmic engine, to bring that heaven and earth together in ourselves, become companions of God, to spiritualize our physicality. And then we'll see, you might say, the physical plant. And then as we go to Revelations, you'll see Revelations in the Cayce readings, and he did 23 readings just on the meaning of Revelations. Revelations is about the symbolic journey within ourselves. It's not Revelations, apocalypse means to reveal. It's not the end of the world. It's an eschatology, but it's really the beginning, you could say. Because whereas this is the physical plant, you might say, Revelations is that, in symbolism, that journey within ourselves of becoming that co-creator, of bringing heaven and earth together, spiritualizing ourselves. Well, and as I said, I think most of us know Rata. Rata, the incarnation of Edgar Cayce, is the high priest in ancient Egypt, and what his purpose was, what he was going on there. And from the readings themselves, to gain for the man ability not only to continue the physical evolution, but the spiritual evolution as well. Not only the physical evolution of ourselves, but the spiritual evolution, to become that co-creator, that companion. And such as one then was Ra, or Rata. And he began the first preparations of what was called the Great Pyramid. And that was the purpose of the Great Pyramid, as we'll see, because as Rata laid out the plans of the Great Pyramid, it was a place of initiation for initiates. That's what it was purpose. I know mainstream Egyptologists say it's a tomb, but the Cayce readings, myself and many researchers, much more than that. It's much, much more than that, and there's fascinating evidence for it. And as the Cayce reading said, and interestingly, it's the same pyramid that the great initiate, the master, took those last brotherhood degrees with John, the forerunner of him. And I find that interesting too, because it's a day late, but happy summer solstice. And the interesting thing with that, the summer solstice which just occurred, and speaking of John the Baptist up here that Cayce talked about, when Jesus and John both together went to the Great Pyramid for the initiation, their final initiations, June 24th is when the nativity, or the birth of John the Baptist, is celebrated. Interestingly enough, of course, December 25th is the nativity or birth that's celebrated for Jesus Christ. The summer solstice and the winter solstice, interestingly enough, which is considered times when the sun stood still. And even in from the Bible, we get another hint kind of along those lines of where, because John says, as I diminish, because at this point after the summer solstice, the days get shorter. As I diminish, you must rise as he spoke to Jesus, because after the winter solstice, the days and the light gets more and longer. Sorry about that, a little tangent, but interesting stuff after all. And also, tonight, if you get a chance, look out if it's a clear sky. We're getting a convergence of Jupiter and Venus going on. You can see it in the western sky right after dusk. It's incredible, right next to the crescent moon, so it doesn't wash it out. You can't miss it, usually bright. Well, what about this physical plant, this creation, this great pyramid that was created for spiritualizing ourselves, to bring that heaven and earth together. From the Cayce readings, and we'll see the evidence for all of this. So when the lines about the earth are considered from the mathematical precision, it'll be fine that the center is, and not the center of the earth, the center of the landmass was right where the Great Pyramid is. And there were mathematical, astrological, and numerological indications for this, all for this purpose that I was speaking about. And he gives a date, that 10,500, even though Egyptologists say about 2500 BC, that and the Sphinx were built along that timeline, according to them. We're going to see some of the evidence and why and how significant it is for that 10,500 period area that he talks about. And that this Rata, in creating this, it was related to the positions of the various stars and acted about the solar system in circles and going towards what? To our freedom, to becoming those co-creators, those companions. And some of the first evidence of this came up was actually from Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval. Well, they were looking at the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid because they had their own feeling that this timeline of the Egyptologists wasn't correct, that it goes to that 10,500. We'll see why that 10,500 is so incredibly significant. Well, one of the things they found with the Sphinx faces due east. You see the pyramids behind it, it faces due east. Well, at 10,500, and only at 10,500, it happens actually maybe about every 26,000 years, Leo, the constellation Leo you see here, comes up out of the due east. At that time, as that terrestrial Sphinx is facing the horizon to the east, out of that eastern horizon comes this celestial lion, the other Sphinx in the sky. Whoops, sorry about that. Coming from the sky. And it's incredible, and it happens at this time because it moves over thousands of years. It'll actually swing rather from the due east about 13 degrees on either side. But at this time period, at that 10,500, it's coming up directly at that time. And when Graham Hancock and Bauval were writing their book about this, they didn't know about Edgar Cayce saying in his readings that the construction of the Great Pyramid is 10,500. And they actually hesitated because they're like, oh, this is from a psychic, wait a minute. But they continue to write because it was so significant and it did fit. And actually, Dr. Robert Schoch, who is, you may be familiar with, written some great books, an incredible researcher, has written about the Sphinx and the pyramids, but about 20 years ago, he's a double PhD in geology and geophysics. He teaches a professor up at Boston College. About 20 years ago or so, he was brought over to look at the Sphinx and the surrounding area of the Sphinx pit, as a geologist and geophysicist, to date it. And you read his books, and he's a scientist, so he's very careful. But from looking at the erosion and the geology and the rocks themselves, he says the Sphinx is at least 5,000 years earlier than 2500 BC, at the very least. And he will say that very confidently from the science side of it, but he also says that easily much older than that, to the 10,500 period. Of course, needless to say, Egyptologists went up in arms about this, but as he said, I just read the rocks. This is what the rocks tell me, So just incredible. So here's more and more evidence, whether it's in the sky or the geology on the earth, appropriately so, of this 10,500 year period. And then Bauval and Adrian Gilbert wrote a book, you might be familiar with, the Orion Mystery, about the constellation Orion, which in the southern sky, that's the Greek term for it, the Great Hunter. That's not what the Egyptians called it. For the Egyptians, that constellation of Orion was the Osiris. And very important, of course, Osiris being one of their gods, of the deities of the Egyptians, among other things, the god of the underworld, very important to them. And what Bauval and Gilbert found and talk about in their book, The Orion Mystery, was that again, back to 10,500, at this time period, it was at its lowest, the constellation Osiris, Orion, was at its lowest meridian, basically saying closest to the horizon. And I've put this up here. You see here, here's at 10,000, and again, this happens at 10,500 era. Here's Orion at that 10,500, right just here on the horizon. And they give you that perspective of just how close it was. At 2015, this is where you'll find Orion now, almost up at the zenith. So you can see the huge difference. And it's considered that, and they write, and they consider that this was the time in Egypt called Zeb Tepi. Zeb Tepi in the hieroglyphs means first time or first occasion, when the gods walked on earth, when heaven and earth were together, the golden period of ancient Egypt, which goes to 10,500. As Edgar Cayce said also, we have all this other evidence. And this is actually, if you're interested in this, it's an incredible program, and it's not that expensive. I have it myself, a software, it's called CyberSky 5. If you're interested in this, I would suggest it to anyone, because what you can do, basically, you can go anywhere, put it in your computer, go anywhere in the world, whether you want to be in the Giza Plateau, whether you want to be at Stonehenge, Guatemala, Tikal, set it and go from anywhere from 15,000 BC to 15,000 AD and see what they saw in the sky. And this is where I took these pictures off that program. But you see, Orion was, for them, Osiris was at his lowest point. And what they found is the three pyramids up on the Giza Plateau, if you're on the north side of them looking south, their peaks, their capstones, their benben stones, as the Egyptians would call them, line up with the belt stars of Orion at that time. So we have all these unique things confirming what the Edgar Cayce readings are, and significant for not only what Cayce says the purpose of the Great Pyramid was for, but also for the ancient Egyptian culture itself. I mean, just incredible stuff, how it fits together for this time period. You know, and why it's this cosmic engine to bring heaven and earth together, you know, to spiritualize ourselves. But what they don't write about, in my research I found, which to me just is just amazing stuff, is what was also going on. That was, you know, Orion is in the south sky. What's going on in the northern sky? As I said a little earlier, over 26,000 years, what they call Plato's Great Year, the precession, the stars seem to move. It's not the stars moving, it's the Earth's wobble. You know, it's kind of like being on a small boat out in the ocean and looking at the horizon during a little rocky seas. That horizon looks like it's going up and down. Yeah, you've been there. It's not the horizon, it's us. Well, it's the same thing with the sky. And now we have Polaris. Polaris is our circumpolar star. Circumpolar star, our North Star, our navigating star, whether by land or by sea, you can navigate by it because it's a star that never moves and a star that never sets. It's circumpolar. We'll always see it in the sky. Well, over those thousands of years, it changes. And this is kind of an example of it. At 3000 BC, it was Thuban, with the star in Draco constellation, what would be the North Star. And at about 12,000 BC would be the star Vega in the constellation Lyra, would be that. What's interesting, at 10,500 there wasn't a specific pole star like these, whether it's Polaris today or Vega 12,000 BC. They didn't have a specific pole star. But what was going on in the northern sky at 10,500 was a trinity of stars. They had a triangle of stars, because astronomers call this today the summer triangle. But at 10,500, it was circumpolar stars. They call it the summer triangle because in the northern latitudes you can see it best in the summer, these three stars. And it's called the summer triangle, and it does set. But at 10,500, these were circumpolar stars. And these are very, again, and for the Egyptians, the circumpolar stars were very important because they were considered the imperishables. They called them the eternal stars, the imperishable stars. Actually, the purpose of their life was to, and we'll talk a little bit more later, it was to unite the Ka and Ba of their soul to become Aks or Akus, brilliant radiant beings of light, to live in the North Stars, to live in the circumpolar imperishable stars, because they were eternal. That was their goal in their journey. And so it's very fitting you have this triangle of stars, not only as representing a pyramid, but also representing the Ben stone I mentioned, the capstone. Son of a gun, it happens to be the capstone year of our A.R.E campaign, very appropriately. In that is that what the capstone represented. And the capstone, you'd find these capstones, you know, that very top of the pyramids, the one for the Great Pyramid is missing, on pyramids. And they're basically a pyramid or pyramidion, and you'd find them on the top of obelisks. For the ancient Egyptians, that represented the Ben. They called it the Ben stone, and it represented the Bennu bird. And the Ben stone, Bennu bird, was the original phoenix. What we know as the Greek phoenix, well, the Greeks got a lot of stuff from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians didn't get credit for it, but before the Greeks had the phoenix, it was known as the Bennu bird or Ben stone in ancient Egypt, that bird of rebirth and resurrection. So they would see this in the sky, and interestingly, these three stars that make the summer triangle, and which would, again, circumpolar at that 10,000 period, Deneb, Vega, and Altar, are all, curiously enough, tied to constellations that are bird constellations also. Deneb is in Cygnus, the great swan. Altar is in Aquila, the eagle. And Vega is in Lyra. And Lyra is not the lyre, it's a hawk holding a lyre. So you have a very curious thing going on here, and very significant, again, for the Egyptians themselves, for their own philosophy, and at this period that Edgar Cayce talked about. And if you think of them reaching that, oh, they wouldn't be knowing about this stuff in 10,500 BC, you know, they couldn't be that kind of astronomers. Well, we're finding out more and more their ancient cultures were incredible archaeoastronomy is showing that they were incredible sky viewers and astronomers. And some evidence of this is from an archaeoastronomer, a branch of archaeology, Dr. Michael Rappengluick, who writes from, this is from the caves in Lascaux, France, dated to 15,000 BC, of the Summer Triangle, just exactly what I'm talking about. And that 5,000 years before the period I'm talking about, he's showing evidence even earlier than that, that they knew about this, that the ancients knew about this at that time. And as he put it, and together these stars were properly known as the Summer Triangle, the brightest objects of the sky, 17,000 years ago, 15,000 BC. And the region of sky would never have set below the horizon, circumpolar stars, and would have been especially prominent at the start of spring, which is interesting because what does spring represent? Rebirth and resurrection, the Ben stone, what we're talking about here, of bringing that, rebirthing ourselves, just as bringing that heaven and earth together, be spiritualizing ourselves, bringing it together. And again, 5,000 years before the construction of the Great Pyramid. And it gets incredible how this fits together, the purpose of Rata, of putting it together, spiritualizing ourselves in matter. Not only from Baval and Gilbert what we've seen, but what was going on, because here's another picture of it. Here's that circumpolar stars of that Summer Triangle, and the Milky Way actually runs right through it. Very appropriate also. It's the Path of Souls, if I can steal that from Greg and his great book on that, where our souls traveled through the Milky Way. But for some reason, I can't even tell you why. You know, one of the things I can do with this program is actually measure the difference of the degrees between different stars. Call it the latitude. Astronomers call it declination, but the latitude, just like Virginia Beach to New York. Virginia Beach is at 36-degree latitude, New York is at 32-degree latitude, so you have a 4-degree difference. When you measure the latitude difference between those three stars of the Summer Triangle, and I did this at least a dozen times because I couldn't believe the results, that from Altar to Vega was 33 degrees. From Vega to Deneb was 22 degrees. And from Deneb to Altar was 11 degrees. 11, 22, 33. Yeah, no, some folks know numerology, master numbers. I mean, just incredible. Not only that, a perfect ratio, 11, 22, 33, a perfect 1, 2, 3 ratio. And it only happens at this time, because I said, oh, you gotta be kidding me. I moved my program forward, move it further back, measure them again to see if they changed, and they did. It only happened in this. And then I sent, some of you probably know James Mullaney, he speaks here, a professional astronomer. Has written some great books about Cayce and astronomy and the cosmos and astronomy books. I sent the stuff to him because I'm like, Jim, am I crazy or is this right? And as he told me, it's right and you're still crazy, but but it fits together incredibly so, because, and very briefly on master numbers, 11, 22, and 33. Just really briefly, 11 generally signifies enlightenment, symbolizes enlightenment. 22 is enlightenment with grounding, because if you hit that enlightenment point, you kind of get out there and you got to get that grounding. And then 33 usually represents universal consciousness, God consciousness, Christ consciousness. And this is what's happening at 10,500, the time of Rata, and the time of the Great Pyramid. Just incredible. And that wasn't all that was going on. I was like, because that was that incredible trend. You know, we already have east and west. We've got the sun that goes east and west. We've got the Sphinx facing east, and we've got the coming due east, Leo, in the night sky coming up east and west. Well, north and south, we saw that this northern triangle of circumpolar stars. Here's what's going on in the south, not only Osiris-Orion constellation going on I spoke about, but at this time you had the winter triangle, what they call today the winter's triangle, the great southern triangle that is going on at this time. And it's tied to Osiris-Osirian. Here it is, the three stars, and Betelgeuse, which is the shoulder of Osiris-Orion, is part of this triangle of stars. So we have going from north to south. And it's Procyon, Betelgeuse, and Sirius. And important stars, Betelgeuse, and we see it to the Egyptians, we see it tied to their Osiris constellation. Sirius was a very important star to the Egyptians. You know, Sirius was tied to Isis, Sothis, some of their deities, Isis, the wife of Osirian, appropriately tied to. And it was Sirius, as one example, is how they measured the flooding of the Nile, when to plant, when to have that earthly rebirth and resurrection, when the Nile would flood and bring up that rich soil. Because what Sirius will do is it'll set below the horizon, since it's in the south, there are not circumpolar stars, it'll set below the horizon and do a helical behind the sunrise about 70 days later. And that's when they knew that the Nile was getting ready to flood. And of course, they tied other things to that. The mummification process that Osiris took you through the underworld was a 70-day process. They tied the heaven, they tied earth together. They saw all this. And this was going on at this time because it's not there anymore. It's moved through the... And of course, you have to measure in the degree difference between the northern stars. I had to check these out. Procyon to Betelgeuse, 8 degrees. Betelgeuse to Sirius, 16 degrees. And Sirius to Procyon, 25 degrees. 24 would have been perfect. Yeah, I know. Everybody's going, wait a minute, 8, 16, 20. It would have been perfect, but it's so incredibly close. We have another 1-2-3 ratio, basically, as they look whether north or south, 8, 16, 24. I mean, just an incredible time and a very significant sky with this is tying all together. And what ties it together incredibly, you heard me speak about the Ka and the Ba, was that one of the earliest deities of the Egyptians was called Nebu-Ka. And this is a deity of the ancient Egyptians that's considered pre-dynastic. Even before the dynasties of Egypt, they had this early deity. And Nebu-Ka was, and you see this amulet up here, was described as a deity. It was a serpent-type deity, but usually described, seen as a human being, as you see here as a serpent, sometimes as a serpent with human legs, and sometimes a serpent with a head, 2 heads, and not 2 heads like you sometimes used to see the old 4-H clubs of a snake with 2 heads, but a serpent with a head at each end. And this was a very significant, important deity to them because his name, Nebu-Ka, means, comes from neb, or to unite, or to yoke together. And Nebu-Ka means he who unites the Ka, because what Nebuchadnezzar did was unite the Ka and Ba together that I spoke about. Because the Ka and Ba of the Egyptian spirit, as they saw it, the Ka was the God force, that higher force of our spirit, and the Ba was our personal, our individual spirit. And Nebuchadnezzar united that Ka and Ba together to become that Aku. You could say bring that, spiritualize ourselves, become that radiant being of light. That was his purpose. And he was a deity for all the ancient Egyptians, not just the pharaoh. He fed them with the milk of life. You know, he gave them their true names. And this is how he fits in. Because that serpent with two heads and a head at each end, this is what happens. Here's the Milky Way running north and south. There's your northern triangle, your circumpolar triangle stars. And there's your southern triangle, the triangular heads. And serpents were known to have triangular heads. And here you have this end. The Milky Way is usually symbolized by many cultures either as a river or as a serpent of light. And here we have that two-headed serpent uniting that Ka and Ba at this 10,500 period. North and south coming across, kind of that example of a serpent with a head at each end. While you had Leo coming out of the eastern horizon, facing that terrestrial sphinx I spoke about coming across west. So you have these incredible north-south and east-west axes tying together the heavens to earth with the Great Pyramid at this time, because that's what they were doing. They were yoking, bringing these together. Just an incredible time period, and this is when it happens. You move them around, it doesn't happen. And the Great Pyramid itself, this is from the Egyptologists. You might know Dr. Mark Lerner, a great book on the complete pyramids. He's written, and he's considered the world expert on Egyptian pyramids. What he says about the Great Pyramid, and actually not only the Great Pyramid, but all pyramids, the purpose of them, that they were cosmic engines. And they were cosmic engines to unite the Ka and Ba and of the pharaoh. Of course, he still thinks it's a tomb. This was in death to unite their Ka and Ba rather than in life. But this transformation continued, uniting the Ka and Ba, and the transformation become that Ak, or Aku, that I spoke about, that glorified being of light. And we'll see that, interestingly, this term glorified used again and again in different aspects. This glorified being of life, and that the pyramid was a simulacrum of a union of heaven and earth. The purpose of the pyramid was to bring heaven and earth together, to be that focal point, to glorify and transform. And what did Rata say? It was being created to bring heaven and earth together, to spiritualize, to not only our physical evolution, but our spiritual evolution. Where the great initiate, Jesus himself and John, took their final initiations. Just a little different opinion on the date of the construction of it, but it's just incredible how it all fits together. And Cayce was talking about this 85 years ago. Just incredible stuff. Now we saw a north-south and east-west axis, but there's still one more axis we hadn't thought about, or I hadn't thought about until, well, that's why it took 10 years to write the book. But up-down, the zenith and the nadir. We have north-south, east-west, then there's up-down. Here at 10,500 is what they would have seen in the sky. We saw it over, and this is just a better picture of that Milky Way going through. And as you see here, that zenith over the Giza Plateau at this 10,500 feet was the center of the Milky Way. The center of the Milky Way is that brightest, widest part. Well, it was right at their zenith, and that's also where the galactic center is. I'm sure some of you read with the 2012 and great work by John Major Jenkins and others, and we're still here. You know, the movies were wrong, and John Major Jenkins and the rest would say it wasn't about the end of the earth. It was about the moving into a new age, but that doesn't make good movies, you know, and sell tickets. But at this period, that was been right above their heads. And in the midst of it, and I've taken the Milky Way out to show what's going on. In the midst of it, you had this, and what today, there's your galactic center, there's your zenith, and right there is what they call the fishhook. And the fishhook is basically a set of stars they call the fishhook, and it's the body and the tail of Scorpius. was right at that center. Ancient Egyptians wouldn't have seen it as a fishhook. They would have seen it, but for them it would have been the shepherd's staff, or what they called the hecastaff. And if you've read a great book by John Van Auken on ancient Egyptian mysticism and symbolism, he talks about the hecastaff representing the kundalini and the 7 chakras. Well, but they're bringing heaven and earth together, and right above them, along with the other axis, is this, fitting in perfectly. And I've taken it out, really cleared it out here, so hopefully you can see it better. That hecastaff, that fishhook, and that zenith and galactic center, all going on at 10,500. And this is where we tie in finally that last part of bringing heaven and earth together in Rata, in the Great Pyramid, of why we're seeing all the evidence for 10,500 and why Rata constructed that pyramid for our spiritual evolution, of bringing that heaven and earth together. Because that fishhook would also represent what today we would call the letter L, but in ancient civilizations in their alphabets would have been Lamed. Lamed is the ancient L, what we now call L today. And you can see it's kind of morphing, and that was the same symbol, whether it was in, a similar symbol, whether it was in Phoenician alphabet, ancient Hebrew, ancient Arabic, ancient Phoenician, that was Lamed. And the interesting part is that letter also meant, it represented the number 30. Alphabets have changed through the ages. Now they're just for phonetic sounding of words. Ancient alphabets were much more significant. They had symbolism behind them. The Hebrew alphabet, even today, has deep symbolism behind the letters besides just being phonetic sounding letters. They had different meanings. A gematria is what they would call it, and whether it's Phoenician gematria, Arabic gematria. Well, in all of these, one example of that, it meant the number 30. And as you can see the history of it, the researchers themselves believe the letter L came from the Semitic crook, which was based on an Egyptian hieroglyph, the hecastaff, that symbol of authority of the pharaoh. And as John Van Auken has pointed out, that representative, that kundalini of bringing our higher consciousness up, of connecting with that God consciousness, of bringing that heaven and earth together, being that co-creator, that companion. And the 30, and also I find it interesting in Hebrew, where that has turned into, looks an awful lot like a serpent to me. Nebuchadnezzar is back. But the interesting part is that being 30 right above their heads. Because as the Cayce reading said, it was right in the middle of the land masses where it was built there. And some people debate this, but if you look at the land masses, the majority of them are in the northern hemisphere, where you'll find the Great Pyramid is pretty much in the middle of the land masses, and at 30 degrees longitude and 30 degrees latitude, with 30 right above its head. Again, anchoring that north, south, east, west, up, down, bringing that all together, tying heaven and earth together. And in full disclosure, it's actually 31 degrees longitude, but for a 25,000 mile circumference, being 70 miles off, I'll give it to them. Pretty incredible. So you have this, and as the readings had said, so you've got this tied together, and I'll get this last piece that brings this heaven and earth together, and the purpose of the Great Pyramid that the Cayce readings talked about. And I've done the numbers too, but other researchers, great researchers, William Fix for one, have shown that the perimeter of the Great Pyramid, when you measure the perimeter, the 4 sides of the Great Pyramid, it's equivalent, coincidentally, to 30 seconds of latitude. I'm like, you gotta be kidding. And outside the Great Pyramid, outside each of those corners, about 22 inches outside are what they call post holes. They found them clearing the debris. They're really not sure what they're for, but at each corner, about 22 inches out are post holes. And when you measure the perimeter of the Great Pyramid from them, that perimeter is equivalent to 30 seconds of longitude. You gotta be kidding me. I mean, but tying it together in just an incredible way. Because what you end up with, if you look at this and how you would symbolize this, you have the north, south, east, west that we've seen in the sky, whether it's Leo, whether it's the sun, whether it's the Sphinx, where we saw the north triangle or the summer triangle, or the great southern triangle that they had going on, north and south, the Milky Way going through it. And the center, the galactic center at their zenith, along with Lamed, the kundalini right above, north, south, creating a symbol that's known as the axis mundi. That's the symbol in sacred geometry and an ancient symbol for representing where heaven and earth come together, meaning by the axis mundi. Kind of figures, once you put it together, it's kind of one of those duh, but there it is. And if you think about it, we might be more familiar with that axis mundi symbol. The Cairo, and not Cairo, Egypt, but Cairo, the Greek letters representing Christ, the first two letters of Christ's name. And what did Christ represent, as we talked about? He was the Son of Man and Son of God. He brought heaven and earth together in himself, as the Cayce readings talk about. And what I love, you often see it, not only just as that, but with that hook on it, which is, well, welcome to Lamed, the Heka staff at the top. I think a little more than coincidence. So we have this. And even as the Egyptologists say themselves, the pyramid, the Great Pyramid and other pyramids was the purpose of bringing heaven and earth together. But Cayce said, to not only the evolution, our physical evolution, but our spiritual evolution, to become the co-creators. Anyway, you look at it, and you see this theme throughout the Cayce readings. And this is just the ancient Egypt side. And then it's like, this was one of those V8 moments where I was like, you gotta be kidding me. His name as the high priest was Ra-Ta. If you look in the Egyptian hieroglyphs, Ra, meaning, the heavens, or God, their sun god, representing the heavens, and that's the symbol, and the symbol Ta in hieroglyphs, which means land or earth. His name was heaven and earth. It's like, okay, how to do it in 10 years, I told you. But, I had to do it. I mean, just incredible. There's the message in every way you can see, every way you can look at. And really so elegant. I mean, it's just right there. Of course, now we've gone through the ancient Egypt part, and it's like, you guys are probably going, whoa, how are we ever going to get to Revelations? Well, here's the other side. Because again, there was the construction back in 10,500 to evolve ourselves physically and truly the spiritually part of it, evolving ourselves spiritually. Now here's the other end, I look at it as the other bookend of the Cayce readings, his readings on Revelations. And they actually did 23 readings for the interpretation of what Revelations meant. Because rather than, as I said, the physical plant, this is the symbolic spirit, explaining the symbolic spiritual journey of what we go through to spiritualize ourselves in physicality. And as they put it, and this is very interesting, we run into entering into the glory again. The Revelations, according to Cayce, is a very special part of the great biblical story. It should be studied as a roadmap for the final spiritualization of our bodies and minds. It's the last book of the Bible in the New Testament, 22 chapters. And as the Cayce readings say, this is that roadmap of what we're going through now, besides the physical plan we talked about of spiritualizing ourselves, becoming that, bringing heaven and earth together, becoming that companion of God, and entering into that glory. And again, from the Cayce readings about Revelations, you become equal with the Creator, to become equal, a co-companion, co-creator, a friend with the Creator. To reach that position when separated must pass through all stages of development. That's the tough part. We all want to get there, but those stages of development. But we are getting there, and we're getting closer and closer. And it's our journey, it's really our birthright about it. And all the emblems in reference to the Revelations and all these forces that war within inside us, within the individual, is the journey through the material, for entering into the material manifestation and entering again into the glory of the awakening spirit, coming to that God consciousness, that Christ consciousness. And these are the forces that known that the senses that must be spiritualized by the will of the individual in the very activities of the material world. The will. We have free will. And there's a purpose for it. You can't be someone's friend if you don't have free will. And that's why we've been granted, given this incredible gift of free will, to become that friend, become that co-creator. In reference to Revelations, what is meant by the new heaven and new earth, it's beheld within self. That new heaven and that new earth, bringing that heaven and earth, is within ourselves to bring that together. That the whole will of the Creator, the Father, the place of abode, the forces within and without make for the new heaven and the new earth. That is our destiny, you know. And as they put it, and I just love how it's all throughout the Cayce readings and really throughout cultures when you start really researching and studying this. I would suggest Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy, which is an awesome book about this, of comparative religions, about they're all saying the same thing, truly, once you get past the dogmas or remove the dogma. But from the Cayce readings themselves, what it meant, the new heaven was a perfected state of consciousness. The new earth was the perfected body, and bringing them together. The New Jerusalem, a state of the evolved soul, of reaching that point. And if you think about how the New Jerusalem was described in Revelations, the New Jerusalem, you read Revelations, when the New Jerusalem came down from heaven to earth. It came down to heaven to earth. That state of the evolved soul came to earth. And how it was described, the shape of it. 12,000 stadia by 12,000 stadia, or here they use furlongs, by 12,000 stadia. That's the dimensions of a cube. And when the axis mundi, when you close, just connect the lines of this axis mundi where heaven and earth together, what do you get? Can you see a drawing of a cube two-dimensionally? You get a cube. And that's what they're describing. And the symbolism of the cube, the importance of that as we see, not only that, of bringing heaven and earth together, and that concept of here in Revelations. Freemasons in a Freemason society or groups, one of the things they'll do either at home or at their desk somewhere, they keep a stone cube, you know, as Masons. And that stone cube represents perfecting. That stone cube, perfecting ourselves into that perfect cube of bringing that heaven and earth together. You go to Islam, the most sacred site in Islam, Mecca. What's at Mecca? The Kaaba, which is Islam for cube. And for them it represents where Abraham built the first church that connected earth and heaven together. Wherever you go, the message is the same. And Cayce was right there with it, bringing it across. Now, and this is the fun part. This is really a fascinating part, because as we talk about in Revelations, and you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, if with some Bible readers, Merkaba, that's out of Ezekiel. That's Old Testament. Well, it's New Testament and Revelations also. And the Merkaba is the Hebrew for chariot or throne chariot. It's actually translated as both a throne and a chariot. And we first see it in Ezekiel. Again, symbolism and what it meant, and I'm quoting the Judaic mysticism tradition here. What the Merkaba was, what that throne chariot was for, was bringing the soul up to the God consciousness. It was representing bringing ourselves, our consciousness, to the God consciousness. And they called them Merkaba riders. And as they put it, from Judaic mysticism, as they put it, the Merkaba rider might be enabled while still in the I love how whoever wrote this is awesome. While still in the trammels of flesh, to mount up to spiritual El Dorado. While still in flesh, reach the spiritual El Dorado. Bring heaven and earth together. That was your Merkaba, your throne, your chariot of raising your higher consciousness, to bring it together here and now while we're alive. And again, that Ezekiel and the description of Ezekiel, and think about being in the throes of making that connection, that God consciousness connection, plugging it in, you know, before you get grounded, and trying to explain what's going on. I mean, words will never do it, but that's all we have to pass this on. But, you know, as they put it, you know, that he saw this living creature with four faces that appeared, wheels within wheels, and that in their rims, and they were so high and awesome, and their rims were full of eyes, For the spirit of the living creatures were within the wheels, wheels within wheels, and rims with eyes within the eyes in these wheels. Trying to describe such an ecstatic state, when we first touch the God consciousness, the universal consciousness, bring that together. But we see this in Revelations. The same Merkaba, the same chariot is in Revelations. In there. And the midst was around the throne. There were the four beasts full of eyes. And just like in Ezekiel, there was the lion, the face of the man, the face of the calf or the oxen, and the eagle. They're all saying the same thing. They were full of eyes because they're trying to describe when you connect that heaven and earth together within yourself. It's first time touching that, you're going to be overwhelmed, and then trying to explain this, what's happening on dimensional. I kind of put this up here, try to picture what they're going through, wheels within wheels, eyes within eyes, and that, trying to a multi-dimensional experience. If you saw something like this is a two-dimensional picture of a three-dimension, imagine trying to put that into 4 or 5 dimensions. When you're going into something like this and trying to then bring it back and describe it, something that's truly beyond words and experience, to give you that idea that wheels within wheels full of eyes. Well, and they have tried it. Christianity has tried to do this. And it's in the symbolism, and sometimes, as I call it, hidden in plain sight. We'll see it. These are on the ceilings of different churches, different cathedrals. In France, one's in the 1800s, one goes back to 1200. But what they call it is what you see here is what they call, and you see it on actually a lot of paintings and sculpture, but it's called Christ in Majesty or Christ in Glorification. And we heard about how the Great Pyramid was to glorify, that bring that heaven and earth together, the glorification process. Well, this is what we're seeing here. And what do you have? You have these Vesica Pisces, or these wheels within wheels, with the Christ in between them, and actually there's the lion, there's the oxen, there's the eagle, there's the face of the man. They're trying to describe that Merkaba, that chariot, that throne, which is that when you reach that Christ consciousness, it bring that glorification to ourselves. These are how they're trying to depict this incredible experience that some of these people had. And I put up here, what did they mean by glorification? We saw it by the Egyptians and some others, uniting the Ka and Ba. Well, another one is that sanctification, reaching that moral perfection. And then second, the body participation, the glorification. This isn't just a soul journey, this is the body. This is bringing heaven and earth together, spiritualizing ourselves in matter. The body participates in this glorification. And the glorification brings participation in the kingdom of God, brings mutual participation. We become those co-creators, those companions. We break bread with God. And finally, glorification is in some sense partaking in God's own glory. We become equal. We become peers. It's our birthright. It's our journey. It's where we're supposed to get. We're finally grow up. Say, Dad, I get you now.
John,
Yes.
those are 2 eyes. The pupil.
Yep. Yeah, and that's that wheel, and we don't really have the time because it goes into much more. They're actually overlapping circles also, that wheels within wheels, where it creates the Vesica Pisces, which is a symbol of, actually these are by many considered Vesica Pisces. Usually you see them, as you see here, vertical. You turn a Vesica Pisces on its side, like you see here, we usually recognize it as the Ixis, which is another symbol for Christ. And that comes from 2 overlapping circles, which would create the Vesica Pisces here, which symbolizes the creative energy, the goddess energy, and it also symbolizes, in sacred geometry, bringing heaven and earth together. Go figure. But yeah, and it has that eye shape. But whether it's vertically or that, but interestingly enough, here we are, that wheels within wheels, circles within circles, eyes within eyes. The Merkaba riders, our journey, our purpose, our goal. And it continues, because this is from the Hebrew, the Merkaba. and that chariot throne. And interestingly enough, is that, and some of this is from Drunvalo Melchizedek, he looks at it a little different perspective, but really saying the same thing. You have not only the Merkaba Hebrew, but the Merkaba in the Egyptian. Because as he put here, he interprets myrrh being a kind of light that's rotated within self, that radiant being of light. The Ka, as we spoke about, that spirit in the Ba, he says the human body. Again, where it's interpreted that individual energy, life energy, versus the Ka, the God energy with us. And that this Merkaba, from the Egyptian perspective, is that same odd idea of that throne chariot to bring our consciousness up to that. But what he doesn't say, if you look in the hieroglyphs, myrrh was the Egyptian hieroglyph for pyramid. And what do the Egyptologists themselves, let alone Cayce, say the purpose of the pyramid? To unite the Ka and Ba together into that brilliant being of light. Myrrh, pyramid, Ka, Ba. Whether it's Rata or Revelations, they're saying the same thing. And whether it's Egyptologist or New Age or Judaism, sacred geometry, all saying the same thing. Our journey has become, to become that Merkaba rider, to bring that heaven and earth together. I mean, it's just incredible. It's spirit entering into matter. And we're back to it in that glorification. What we saw, that those paintings on those cathedral ceilings, the glorification of Christ, the majesty glorification, and what they talk about in the Great Pyramid. From Revelations to Rata, was about becoming that glorified being of light that we truly are. We just put a lot of shades over it, and that it glorifies and it brings it all together. And it's just not this. This is, again, we went from Rata, the Great Pyramid, all the way down to the end of Revelation. I bet you didn't think we were going to get there. From one end to the other, so to speak. But it's a thread that runs through the entire Cayce readings. And I've taken these, and these are just a few. I've taken these quotes from Contemporary Cayce, the new book just out by Kevin Tedeschi and Henry Reed. If you hadn't had a chance to read it, great book. But you'll find, and I've just taken a few of them out here, but you'll find this is really the theme that goes through all the Cayce readings, is our journey, what we're about. Is that the purpose behind this physical consciousness experience that we're in right now is ultimately to bring the divine to earth. The Cayce readings present the unique premise that the principal purpose for life on earth is to bring spirit into the third dimension, to bring heaven and earth together, to spiritualize ourselves. And it goes on again, one of the ultimate goals in life is somehow to give expression to the soul's individuality while we are on earth, thus bringing spirit into earth. And it calls upon the very best within us to work in cooperation with the divine through the process somehow bringing spirit into earth, bringing heaven and earth together. That's the journey. And truly, as you look through all different cultures, whether it's the Cayce readings, whether it's the Egyptian, we've seen the Egyptian, whether it's in Christianity, they all, and in their symbolism, they're all saying the same thing about bringing heaven now, not in a tomb, but within ourselves. It's now. And I put this one more, and this is from Aldous Huxley, and this is from The Divine Within, another great book I would recommend, that it is possible for human beings to love, know, and from virtually to become an actual identical with the divine ground. That is to achieve the unitive knowledge of Godhead is the final end. No matter where you look, when people look into this, this is what our journey is, what our purpose is to spiritualize ourselves, to bring that heaven and earth together. Truly a theme and a thread that runs throughout, that talk about bringing the Cayce readings to life. This is bringing ourselves to life, our true life. This is what it's about in there. And I put this up here, and this is from the Edgar Cayce letters themselves. This is not from his readings. This is from his letters with others, what he wrote to others. And what he says is, for Edgar Cayce writing to a friend, my purpose if I know it, is to discover the truths and to find out how or in what manner they may be given to seekers for their own expression of the cosmic mind in materiality. He writes in his own letters that his purpose is to help us bring heaven and earth together within ourselves now. And Allison, where are you back? If you're interested in this stuff in the Cayce, this is a theme that runs throughout the Cayce readings, but I just wanted to put up this here. If you're interested, the Egyptian readings, which fills a book about this thick, just pulling those out that they have. If you're interested, there is actually an Egypt group that meets on a weekly basis up here to go through the readings and look at this incredible material. And they're even still meeting through Congress. They meet on Tuesdays. Is that up here? Yeah, and as this puts here, it's one of the greatest ages, like I said, Zep Tepi, that golden period. And that the key to understanding, us has come there. Yeah, well, the key to understanding, it's there. It's throughout all of them. But they meet, and they meet on Tuesdays, and they'll be meeting tomorrow 12 to 1:30, 12 up in a periodic room, and great talk. And if you have time, we have a lot of things going on. They also have June Bro will be up there from 10:30 to 12 to talk. If you've met June Bro, who worked, Harmon and June worked with Edgar Cayce back in the 40s, and wonderful, wonderful person, and one who is still around that experienced Edgar. They're around, and more of this incredible Egyptian heritage we have that to bring heaven and earth together. All right, well, thank you. If there are any questions, if I can answer them, I'll be more than happy to. Like I said, I took you on a pretty long journey, but we got there. Well, yeah, we got